Hey, thanks for stopping by. My name is Tyler, and today I have some super exciting news. I know I use that intro a lot, but again, as always, I do have some super exciting news, and that news is I was able to successfully pass my Azure AZ-104 on the first attempt. So I wanted to make a video, talk about what my score was, some of the highlights of my studies. I'm not going to go over everything I used in depth. You can check out my last AZ-104 video for more details on my thoughts around the study materials I used and just a more in-depth analysis of that perspective. This video is going to be more about how I felt during the exam. Is the exam that hard? And kind of what's the best strategy to walk in the exam room with to make sure A, you're getting the questions correct, and B, you don't run out of time, because if you read around on the internet, that is also a huge thing that people talk about, and time was definitely something I had to worry about as well. With that being said, let's get into it. So first things first, I was able to score a 836 out of 1,000 on this exam. For the 104, that's actually a fairly good score. This exam is known to be absolutely brutal and just super, super difficult in every single way, and I can definitely say it was. It was a really hard exam, so I was very happy with the score I got. Now, I took a bit longer than most people do to study for this exam, but if you've watched the channel at all, you guys know I'm hugely in favor of the overstudy to make sure you pass exam strategy rather than do the bare minimum you possibly can to get the piece of paper. In my mind, I would rather study all the material that's out there, get a really good understanding of the content that the exam is covering. So not only do I walk away with a passing exam on the first try, I also feel fairly confident implementing the technologies that I learned during the study process. So now on to the actual exam experience. Where did I take it? How hard was it? How much time did I have left? All those fun things. So first things first, I always like to take my exams in a testing center. If you're in the Denver area, International IT Solutions has been my favorite. It's a super small testing center, so I feel like it helps a lot with that testing anxiety, and it's just kind of a chill vibe. So I'm a huge fan of that testing center, and I did take it in person there just to make sure I didn't have to deal with any of the wonderful things around remote testing. If you guys have taken remote tests as well, which I've taken two of, sometimes it can be a bit of a disaster getting them started and having to do room scans throughout the exam and just all sorts of complications that you can completely eliminate if you go to a testing center. The point of testing day is to focus on the exam questions. It's not to focus on making sure you have your exam environment set up. If you go to a testing center, you can just eliminate that entirely. So that is absolutely my recommendation for pretty much every certification if it's available, but especially the AZ-104, because it's a really hard exam and you need all the brain power you can focused on the actual test questions. So moving on to what my exam experience was like. Obviously, I can't go over what the questions were or what they ask about. Kind of stuff like that is very sensitive. However, I can talk about the general structure of the exam and the strategy I took while taking it. So starting off, the first thing on my exam was my case study. Evidently, for some people, it's at the end or the middle. For me, it was right at the start. So we're going to start there. For the case studies, I think approaching them strategically is hugely important to save on time and to not spend longer than you need to on it. So personally, what I did is I would read the question part of the case study, the actual technical requirement that the question is looking for, and then I would skim read the case study and only really pick out things that were relevant to that question. I didn't even worry about all the technical requirements. I was only looking for things that were relevant to what the possible answer could be. Because if you go through and you read the entire case study and you either A, read the entire thing for all 5 case study questions, you're going to run out of time. Those case studies are pretty massive and have a lot of detail in them. Or B, if you try to read the entire case study with like a super close amount of detail the first time and then try to not read it at all for the other 4 questions, the odds of you forgetting a requirement or forgetting part of the scenario on the following 4 questions is pretty high. So I wouldn't recommend that strategy either. Again, the strategy I recommend for case study questions is to very quickly skim read it for each 5 of the questions. And for each 5 of the questions, only focus on remembering things that are relevant to that question and just kind of put your blinders on to the rest of the case study. By doing that, I think my case study only took me about 10 minutes, which was huge because I still had a whole bunch of time left to answer the rest of the 45, 50 questions I had left to answer. As for the rest of the like 40-ish questions, I don't think they're as long as people say they are. At least in my experience, I didn't get these crazy long questions. Like if you've ever taken the AWS Solutions Architect Associate, this guy, those questions are super long. Paragraph answers, multi-paragraph questions, super, super brutal. However, in my experience, the AZ-104 did not have that many of those questions. Now, not to say that there weren't any long questions. I did have more than a handful of questions that were kind of a multi-paragraph question, and those were really tricky to read through quickly and find out what the ask was, and again, cut out that fluff so I'm not focusing on details that aren't relevant to what one of the answers is. My main strategy for all of the other questions that weren't the case study were honestly not that far off from the case study. If the question, again, I specify question, which is weird, like that last sentence that is the actual technical ask of what your answer will relate to. If that is a really short section, I will always read that first and then go into the details of the start of the question to be able to read through the details and understand, is this piece of information relevant? Is it not? I feel like I'm harping on cutting out information that isn't relevant to the question. However, if you try to take in every single detail they're giving you on every single question, you're going to run out of time. Speaking of time, after going through all the questions once and answering them to the best of my ability, I was left with, I think, just around 20, 30 minutes to go back and review. 4 questions that I didn't know the answer to right away. I would read it once, maybe twice, and just give it my best guess, flag it, and move on. Because, again, harping on the time thing again, you don't have that much time to sit there and write stuff down and try to figure out the answer for every single question. If you're not able to figure it out in the first 1, maybe 2 minutes, you're probably better flagging it and moving on to make sure that you have at least a somewhat confident answer for every single question on the exam. And then whatever time you have left over can be spent going back to those harder questions that you have to spend some more time on. And then you can go through and answer those and see, okay, am I able to give a better answer for this question, or is it just going to have to be an educated guess? So to quickly recap, I know I went through that relatively quickly. My strategy for the exam that I would recommend to pretty much anyone else out there is go through the case study first. Again, in my experience, it was at the start, so I didn't really have to think about that. I would say if it's to somewhere else in your exam, just get it out of the way so you're not dreading this case study. And then once the case study is done, go through all of the questions. If you get stuck on one and you can't get the answer in a handful of minutes, flag it and move on. Drop an answer, don't leave it unanswered. Give it your best answer, flag it, and move on. Go through all the questions like that, and then hopefully you'll be left with some amount of time to go back and review, and you can use that time at the end to go back to those flag questions and really dig into it more. I would also mention just because you have extra time at the end, you almost want to use the same strategy when you're going through your flag questions, because you don't have 20 minutes to dump on one question. If you go back to a flagged question and you're 8 minutes deep into it and you still don't have any idea what the answer is, take an educated guess, move on to the next flagged question, and just go through as many flagged questions as you can before your time runs out. Moving on from general exam strategy advice, I want to move on to the question that seemingly haunts the internet, which is the AZ-104 that hard? And you'll have some people saying it's the most impossible thing ever. It's absolutely insane. No one can pass this test. And then you have the people that are like, oh, it's not that bad. I passed it in a month. I'm somewhere in the middle on this. Again, I took I think almost 5 months to study for this exam. I have 116 pages of notes on here for just the AZ-104. I read the textbook. I did copious amounts of practice questions. I watched a bunch of video courses. I did all of Microsoft Learn. I studied a lot for this exam. And after those almost 5 months of studying, I was able to go into the exam room and pass with a pretty decent score, I would say. I still think the questions were pretty tricky. They weren't easy questions. I didn't know the answer to every single question. However, with all of the studying, there were a lot of questions where I could very easily kind of pick out what the question is looking for and which technologies are going to fit that scenario the best, or which troubleshooting step you need to take next to resolve whatever issue it's asking. And so it falls into this interesting zone of, I guess, kind of every certification where if you put in the hours and hours and hours of time to study for it, it's absolutely passable. And it's not going to take you 3 years to study for. However, it's also not feasible to go through Microsoft Learn one time and expect to pass, because it is a very difficult exam and it requires a lot of attention to study for. If you're willing to give that attention, it's not too bad. It's absolutely passable again. It just takes a lot of time to study for. With all that being said, I want to say thank you guys very much for watching. I will have a video shortly on what my next certification is. I don't think many people watch these to the end, so I'm going to say it here too and see if anybody comments on it. The next certification I'm going for, I've already started. I'm, I think, 40 pages deep into my notes packet I'm making, is the AWS Solutions Architect Professional. This will be by far the hardest certification I've gone for, and the timeline I'm giving myself for this one is about a year, is what I expected to take me. So, but again, with all that being said, thank you guys very much for watching. If you have any questions, looking for any advice around the tech industry, whatever certification you're going for, drop it in the comments. I love talking to you guys, and I will catch you later.